Chapter 54. He bought my insurance. At that moment, Bone Blade had lost all fighting abilities. His hands and feet were tied up and he had fainted. He was then carried on the shoulders of a tall and muscular man. Beside the burly dude was another person wearing a black leather coat. This person was an old man with a hunchback. Perhaps it was also because of this that he didn't wear a mask that concealed his identity. Under his messy gray hair was a face filled with wrinkles. His gaze was cold and he exuded a murderous aura. The fluctuations on his body were even more intense, surpassing that of Captain Lei and the Blood Shadow team captain back then. Clearly, he was at 70% of check condensation. Xu Qing had never seen such a cultivation among the scavengers in the campsite. Manager, this fog came at a very bad time. What should we do about the other meat treasures that have been marked? While Xu Qing was observing from afar, the burly dude carrying the bone saber asked in a muffled voice. It's all this meat treasure's fault. He kept dodging and wasting time. The black-clothed old man coldly looked at the unconscious Bone Blade. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. Let the others come over. We'll go out first and wait for the fog to dissipate before we go look for those meat treasures. Boss is really too much. Couldn't he just capture them at the campsite? Why did he have to wait for them to enter the forbidden zone before letting us capture them? The burly dude grumbled unhappily. The old man at the side snorted coldly. What boss wants is a steady flow. It's not something that a pig brain like you can understand. If we capture people in the campsite, how will the campsite continue operating? When the burly dude heard this, he didn't think much of it, but he didn't refute it. He followed the old man's instructions and took out a whistle to blow. Very soon, the two men in black whom Xu Qing saw earlier arrived swiftly. Xu Qing didn't stop them, nor did he make a move. He squatted on the treetop in the distance and coldly watched everything. After confirming that there were indeed 4 people on the other side, Xu Qing glanced at the unconscious Bone Blade when he saw that they were about to leave. If he hadn't seen this, or if Bone Blade hadn't bought insurance, or if it had happened outside the jungle, Xu Qing wouldn't have bothered. He wasn't a sane and didn't have the energy to save others. However, he had his own principles. Since you bought my insurance, I have to ensure that you leave the forbidden zone. As for whether they lived or died after leaving, he didn't care. In the next instant, Xu Qing's body rushed out. His speed was so fast that he left behind an off-Wuxia on the spot. He was like an arrow that left the bow, heading straight for the burly dude with Bone Blade on his back. His previous hiding spot was too well hidden and his attacks were as quick as lightning. Therefore, the 3 men in black, including the burly dude, didn't notice him at all. Only the old man in black did. At that moment, his expression changed and he quickly turned around. He even raised his right hand and, in an instant, numerous ice blades rapidly condensed and shot into the air. However, it was still too late. The ice blade missed and Xu Qing had already arrived beside the burly dude. As the wind blew wildly, his long hair fluttered in the wind. The sharpness in his eyes and the cold gleam of the dagger in his hand clashed together, revealing his killing intent. The saber slashed across the burly dude's throat with such great force that the 5th level of his check condensation didn't have the slightest chance to resist or react. He didn't even have the time to scream before his head flew off. Blood splattered everywhere. At that moment, Bone Blade fell to the ground. Xu Qing grabbed onto his clothes and with a few steps, he appeared in the distance. After throwing Bone Blade to the side, Xu Qing turned and stared coldly at the other 3 like a hunter. At that moment, the burly dude's dazed head, his corpse and the old man's empty ice blade landed on the ground at the same time. The surroundings instantly fell silent. The shock caused by this scene was extremely great, causing the black-robed old man and his 2 companions to feel their hearts pounding. All of them looked at Xu Qing in unison. Kid, Onif, the 2 men in black behind the old man, widened his eyes when he saw Xu Qing and blurted out, "Shut up." The old man in black in front immediately growled. The man in black also realized that he had misspoken and stopped talking. Xu Qing cast a deep glance at the 3 of them. That sentence had already exposed everything. Kid, this matter has nothing to do with you. Scram immediately. I can treat it as though you never appeared. The black-robed old man's expression was gloomy as he stared fixedly at Xu Qing. He didn't bother hiding it and spoke slowly. At that moment, a gust of wind blew over. When it passed by Xu Qing's location, it scattered some of his remnant seawater. and blew it over to where the old man and the other two were. The wind stirred up the leaves on the ground and caused them to rustle. It was as though the fog had grown thicker in the wind. Xu Qing fell silent and didn't speak. Bone Blade had long regained consciousness, but he had been pretending to be unconscious. Now that he heard the old man's words, he grew anxious. He was worried that Xu Qing wouldn't continue to save him, so he hurriedly opened his eyes. He felt that only by pulling Xu Qing to the point where he had to fight to the death would it be safe. There was only one way to do this. Hence, He shouted, "Kid, don't listen to him. They are the camp leader's men." Over the years, many of the scavengers who went missing from the campsite were secretly captured by them and sold to the merchant group as treasure nurturers. This is the camp leader's greatest secret. His words caused the old man in black to narrow his eyes. He stared at Xu Qing and spoke again. "I'm giving you one last chance. Don't be a busybody." Xu Qing ignored Bone Blade's words. The cause and effect of this matter had nothing to do with him. His thoughts were very simple and direct. "After buying my insurance, I will ensure that you leave the Forbidden Zone. As for your life and death after leaving, it has nothing to do with me." "He bought my insurance," Xu Qing said seriously. The black-clothed old man's expression turned even colder. However, in the next instant, the corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile as he abruptly raised his hands. Immediately, a gigantic red halo appeared beneath his feet. Waves of cold wind suddenly rose into the air from within the ring, as though it had transformed into a tornado. Its aura was extraordinary. "Kid, your experience is still too shallow. You actually gave me time to cast a spell. In that case you can die." The old man let out a low roar and his hands trembled fiercely. Immediately, the wind rings around him became even more majestic and countless blood-colored ice blades rapidly formed. At the same time, the two men in black beside him also let out a sinister laugh as they charged at Xu Qing from both sides. Bone Blade's gaze was filled with despair. Only Xu Qing's expression was very calm from the start to the end. When the two figures from the left and right approached and the ice blade storm was about to erupt around the black-clothed old man, he spoke softly. "I have to thank you too." Almost at the instant Xu Qing spoke, the two men in black who were rushing toward him suddenly stopped in their tracks. Their expressions instantly turned ashen and their eyes widened in horror. Streams of black-colored blood actually flowed out of their 7 orifices. It was as though their bodies were poisoned and they couldn't even breathe. The two of them were horrified to the extreme and instinctively wanted to escape. However, after taking a few steps back, the two of them spat out a large mouthful of black blood. Their bodies lost all their strength and they stumbled to the ground. Their bodies twitched violently and their expressions were filled with extreme pain. It was as though they were enduring torture from the human world. They let out a shrill and shocking cry of agony and died abruptly in the next moment. This scene caused Bone Blade to be overwhelmed with horror. The mind of the black-clothed old man who was casting the spell also rumbled and the storm that was maintained in the surroundings became unstable. At that moment, black blood flowed out of his eyes. The old man's expression changed drastically. Unable to maintain the stability of the spell, he abruptly pushed it out, causing the ice blade to erupt in advance. However, due to the fluctuations in his mind, although the explosive power was great, there was a deviation in the area covered. Xu Qing's body swayed as he grabbed Bone Blade and easily dodged the attack. He then looked at the black-clothed old man who was rapidly retreating and wanted to escape. Seeing the other party continuously taking out medicinal pills and swallowing them as he retreated, Xu Qing didn't stop him. Instead, he mumbled softly amidst Bone Blade's terror. 1, 2, 3. The instant the word 3 left his mouth, the black-clothed old man coughed out a large mouthful of black blood. There were even rotting pieces of internal organs in it. His body staggered but he didn't fall to the ground. Although his face was pale, he seemed to still have some strength left and was about to flee quickly. When Xu Qing saw the scene, he frowned. His body instantly rushed out and directly caught up to the old man. Under the despair on the other party's face, he threw a punch at his chest. A malevolent-looking shadow instantly appeared on his fist. He then silently laughed sinisterly and pounced toward the old man. Boom! The old man's body trembled and the clothes on his chest instantly shattered into ashes. His heart collapsed and he died. His corpse fell to the ground and the flesh on his chest caved in, forming a ghastly face. It was a shocking sight. In theory, the 7 types of poison powder that were spread through the wind should be used in a mixture. One would die after being poisoned for a few breaths. Why is he still able to persist? It seems like I still need to improve. Xu Qing mumbled and ignored Bone Blade, who was scared silly. He began to organize the spoils and finally took out the corpse-destroying powder, scattering it on the 3 corpses. As sizzling sounds rang out in the silent jungle, the 3 corpses turned into blood. After doing this, Xu Qing looked at Bone Blade. Bone Blade was so frightened by Xu Qing's attack that his body and mind were trembling. In his eyes, the figure of the youth before him seemed to have become the most terrifying existence in this world. Hence, when Xu Qing's gaze swept over him, he immediately shivered. Amidst his shivering, he felt that it was somewhat difficult to breathe. The skin on his hands also turned green. This scene almost caused him to break down. Fellow Taoist kid, I was poisoned too. In this area with wind, all will be poisoned, Xu Qing calmly said. Antidote. Give me the antidote. Bone Blade was anxious. He felt a piercing pain all over his body. There's no antidote for my poison. Xu Qing lifted his head and looked at the approaching fog. Amidst Bone Blade's despair, he calmly spoke again. I came to save you because you bought insurance, but this isn't something you can rely on to play tricks. Fellow Taoist kid, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. My body is starting to hurt. Look, I'm bruised. Bone Blade trembled and he saw that his hands were turning increasingly greenish-black. The scene of the 2 men in black bleeding from their 7 orifices and dying tragically surfaced in his mind, and the terror in his heart reached its peak. Xu Qing coldly glanced at him. With a wave of his right hand, a packet of medicinal powder was thrown over. Bone Blade hurriedly caught it and directly poured it into his mouth. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to neutralize the poison if he ate too little. Very soon, the green color on his body dissipated, but his face began to swell. What did you feed me? My swollen mouth feels a little numb. Bone Blade felt that his face was very swollen and he couldn't speak properly. He looked at Xu Qing blankly.